Brother. So good afternoon, everyone, and nice to meet you all again. Not where I expected to see you, but this is pretty good for a short-term alternative vacation. And I've been hearing some of the stories of the kindness and generosity and sacrifices that people have been making since the flooding of school. And in some ways, we say it's a cliche, but it's a true one, of course, that unfortunate events tend to draw out the best in people. But the thought I have, a couple of thoughts I have about this. Firstly, that it's a proof, if you like, of the goodness and the potential in people. That sometimes when these unfortunate things happen and people come forward, and there's often this comment, well, I never thought that person or this person would come forward in that kind of way. Pleasantly surprised by it. But the question for me is, given that we have this proof of the goodness and the altruism and the kindness that people have within them, how to tap that or how to release that, even in situations where there isn't a sense of crisis or a sense of this is the time that we really need to come forward. Of course, from the Buddhist point of view, life is a state of emergency. In other words, it's a war zone, if you like. But like if you look at a case of a war, even a ravaging civil war like we had in Syria recently, it's obviously not the case that every single settlement in a country during an awful war is under bombardment or people are killing each other. There can be districts, even provinces that are almost completely free of overt conflict for most of the duration of the war. Yet on the map we say they're in the war zone, and their stability and their freedom from pain and strife is very tentative and unreliable, and can disappear at any moment. And so if we were to see people in a town, in a village surrounded by armies fighting, and people were just laughing and joking and having a good time, maybe one part of us would appreciate, well, yeah, good for them. But another part, we feel kind of a sadness and a kind of a twinge to feel that, they're a little bit deluded. They're sitting and drinking and having a good time. They don't realize that the war is all around them and could engulf their lives at any moment. So this is an analogy for the way that the Buddha encouraged us to look at human life. It's not a rejection of or a criticism of of people wanting just to relax and have a good time sometime and forget all the terrible things in the world. But at the same time, we should seek to open our minds to context and the big picture of our lives, and resist the temptation to be caught up, overly obsessed with the details of our life. And this, of course, is one of the important reasons why we need to put aside a certain amount of time every day just to take a step back from all our duties and responsibilities and worries and plans, and come back to the real world. Somebody who was talking today and came off, actually it was Michelle Michael, who came off the retreat. He'd been on to find out the news of the flooding, and he said it was like a rude awakening to the real world. And I was thinking, no, you were in the real world on the retreat. This is not the real world. And so what I'm suggesting is that this, what is real, is the body and the mind. This is the real in the sense it's directly experienceable in the present moment. And we need to come back to this real world every day, at least for a few minutes, or as long as we can afford to spend, to give us a new perspective, or a more an enhanced version of our life. Or to do another analogy, we say without the practice of meditation, it's like we're living in a 2D world, two-dimensional world. And with the insights and the experience and the perspective given by meditation practice, we can experience a three-dimensional world. So if the third dimension doesn't deny or throw out the first two dimensions, but it enriches it and gives it more meaning and depth and purpose. So in our daily lives, we always, most of the time, we have this pressure upon us to be somebody or other, to be a son or a daughter, a father, a mother, a brother, a sister, a friend, an employer, an employee, all these different roles that we have to play. And then when we sit and we close our eyes, it's an in-breath, an out-breath, and suddenly all of those identities and all of those demands and pressures and expectations, they dissolve. And we can fully appreciate being nobody. And I think that like a balanced life is one in which we have this sense of harmony between being somebody and being nobody. Or to put it another way, that if we lack this third dimension in life, it's like everything matters just too much. And having a sense or an access to a dimension of our life where all of this is not so substantial, it's important. But there is a part of us, there is perhaps the most valuable and beautiful part of us, which is not all these things. And the extent to which we can dwell in this and seek to incorporate this in our lives, in the world, I think is something that's good for our physical health, good for our emotional health, good for our spiritual health. And then there are a lot of, I see a lot of mistaken ideas about meditation around these days. One, of course, when it's completely taken out of its context and the whole education or training of our actions, speech, emotions, mind, and becomes simply a technique, a technology, then it's diminished by that, reduced by that, and often ends up as little more than a stress reduction technique. And it loses its revolutionary and awakening dimension altogether. But more than that, there are also these gaining ideas, or this idea that you meditate in order to become peaceful or to become still. And if you meditate and you don't experience that stillness, then you failed, you're not good at it, you don't have what it takes, it's just too difficult, etc., etc. But initially, the idea of meditation is of exposing, of illuminating the nature of the ordinary mind. So if we can compare it to a stream, let's say you're on it's a huge river, like the Amazon, where you can't see, it's so wide that you can't see either bank, and you're floating along on a raft. Now, if that's all you've ever done, just floated along on a raft on a river where you can't see either bank, it's very unlikely that you have any kind of sense of the strength of the current or the nature of the current. So what do you do in order to get that kind of knowledge? Well, you paddle against the stream, and that's how you get to know the stream, through going against the stream. So in meditation, we go against the stream of the ordinary mind, which is jumping here, jumping there, flowing here, flowing there, and we give it just one focus of attention. And immediately there's a reaction to that. And the reaction comes in various forms, and it will depend to a certain extent on your personality, on a certain extent to your physical health and all kinds of other causes and conditions, but there will be sensual thoughts, thoughts of aversion and discontent. There will be a sense of sloth and dullness in the mind, agitation in the mind, doubts in the mind. These are what we call the hindrances to a healthy mind. And as long as these hindrances are present in the mind, there's no peace, there's no wisdom, there's no understanding. Now, the untrained mind is always a prey of these hindrances, but because they're so much part of our life, that we have no sense of them as being alien to the mind, or as things that come into the mind and possess the mind. So the simple way that we gain this kind of insight, as I say, is to give the mind a job to do and see what comes up. And in this sense, we can talk about meditation, particularly in the early period, as a problem-solving activity. So we're deliberately bringing up hindrances in the mind in order to find ways of protecting the mind against them and of letting them go. So unless you go against the stream of the mind, you can't distinguish the different strands and different elements of this inner turmoil, which we are so accustomed to as to think it's normality. But by giving the mind this task to do, which we take on voluntarily, then we're able to see for ourselves, oh yes, this is how the mind becomes obsessed with memory. This is how the mind becomes obsessed with imagination. This is the way the mind reacts to not being able to do what it wants to do. And we learn so much. So it's a learning process, it's a problem-solving process, and it's not just a matter of applying a technique in order to get a result. That's a very worldly and not a very helpful way of looking at it. Another and very important life skill that we can learn from practice of meditation is that of applying relaxed effort. So that's something of like a holy grail for people in many different ways of life, in sport, in art, in so many different areas. But in meditation, we have this very efficient immediate feedback system. So you're trying to focus on the breath, but if you put too much effort in it without sufficient relaxation, you immediately get tense and you get a headache or some difficulty in the breathing's not smooth and natural. So you get this feedback, too much effort, not enough relaxation. If you're too relaxed, then you either go off into a daydream or else you get dull and sleepy. And so this is your feedback. So rather than these things being, proof that you're hopeless and you can't do this, these are, in fact, information. These things are telling you that you need to tweak your effort to increase the amount of relaxation, or to increase the amount of effort itself. So this is a life skill that one's learning. Another life skill or quality, and one which I think should play a lot larger part in education system than is general, is the skill of self-motivation. Now, most people can watch a movie or a sports match, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours or something, and not feel any physical discomfort because their mind is so wrapped up in the story, in the narrative, in the emotion. But if they do a test the brainwaves of someone who's watching a movie or something, it's almost identical to the brainwaves of someone under hypnosis. So you're basically in a semi-hypnotic state. And what's important to observe is that there's almost no effort involved of any kind. And that's the whole point. It draws you in. It leads you on. You don't have to do anything. You're passive. So it's a very passive experience. But if you're going to focus your mind on a particular physical sensation, like the breath, particularly the breath, there's nothing exciting, interesting, absorbing, fascinating in the inhalation and the exhalation. So the only way that you're going to be able to stay with the breath for any length of time is through motivating yourself and applying this right effort. So you have to see the value, you have to see the purpose, you have to find a way of persuading your mind that it's more valuable use of your time to be mindful of the sensation of your breath than it is to think about something else or get up and do something else altogether. So this is a real challenge to find a motivation for an activity which is valuable but doesn't give immediate pleasant results. It's something you have to be very patient with. And all meditators, I think, will agree that motivation is probably one of the biggest obstacles, in that you're in a meditation retreat center and there is a fixed schedule every day and there's a social pressure of getting up in the morning, and it's quite easy to conform to the set schedule and keep to all the meetings. But the moment that you're back home and by yourself and you don't have a bell ringing, or you don't have that sense that if you don't go everyone else will know and criticize you, or, then it's much more difficult. So that's when you have to find a means, a way of thinking about what you're doing, of framing what you're doing in such a way that you can sustain that sense of interest and commitment. So sometimes children will say to me, "Oh, this is boring." So I say, well, if you find something boring, it just means you're not smart enough to be not bored by it. You haven't developed the means, the skillful means to be able to look at what you're doing and motivate yourself. So it's not like there's anything out there which has a property of boringness. Like it's like salt is salty or sugar is sweet. There's not something which are inherently boring, because if that was the case, everybody would find all the same things boring, because we all find the same things sweet. But certain things, some people find really boring, other people find fascinating. So it's obviously a function of the way that we apply ourselves to things. And again, sometimes teachers feel a lot of pressure, to make their classes fun. The kids have to enjoy their lessons. They have to be sanok. And I just don't think that's really such a good aim, because outside of the classroom, where is there any kind of activity, where is there any kind of livelihood where you can expect or think you have a right to be entertained all the time, or for it to be sanok, But if you can teach yourself and teach children how to look at what they're doing in such a way as to promote some interest and commitment, then you're no longer caught in, as a prey of this boring activities. That you can find interest in things which would at first glance be extremely boring. In forest monasteries, the work that monks do is like sweeping and cleaning and polishing, and all these kinds of repetitive activities, which many people think are boring. But if you're really focused in meditation, having a physical activity which is very repetitive, it provides a backdrop over which you can see the movements of the mind, of liking and disliking, and all the different emotions that can flow through the mind. So seeing that, you no longer feel, oh, this is so monotonous and boring, but just seeing that you're giving yourself like a blank screen on which you can learn about the movements of your mind. But with study and with work, then you just sit and think, is there a value to this? Is there something that's I feel good about doing this, or which will have a long, if not a short-term, pleasant experience, will in the long term be of value to you? So being able to reframe and recalibrate the way that you're looking at your present activity is, I think, a really important skill. As I say, like meditating on the breath or something is kind of like the acid test of this, if you like. It's really tough to sustain commitment to meditation while you still have not really experienced any of the the fruits of the practice. So there's an awful lot to learn, but in monasteries, as in the one which I trained in, which I led and administered, we don't just spend all day meditating in terms of walking up and down, sitting with our eyes closed, because there are sitting in meditation, walking meditation, you can learn an awful lot. But there are certain things that are learned easier, more easily, in community and in contact with other people. And particularly in the whole area of what we call ditthi-mana, attachment to views and opinions and ideas and beliefs, and our conceit and idea of who we are and what's and how people should treat us and our standing in the world and how people look at us, and all these kinds of this whole area of defilement, what we call defilement, and cause of suffering. It's very difficult to do much work on that kind of defilement during the intense meditation retreats. But through the intense meditation, you're developing a quality and an integrity of mindfulness and self-awareness, which you carry with you into everyday situations. You know, when you realize that people don't look at you in the same way that you look at yourself, or people have unfair or distorted ideas about you, or what you believe at least to be so, and how you deal with all those niggly little discomforts that always arise when human beings live together. You know, there's always just something like rubbing you up the wrong way, isn't there? You know, it's never completely comfortable, even when you live with people that you love and you respect. There's always something, just this little bit, and that's what you're learning from. And as you're developing the awareness that you're not just reacting to things, but you're on this path going from like a blind reaction to a mindful response, from reaction to response. And when you're mindful, then it is, I think, comparable to like elite sports people. That like if there's anything that you see like a unifying factor of people who are at the very top end of a sport or a martial art or whatever it is, I think you hear again and again, it just seems like they have more time than anybody else. No, not clock time, but there's just something about them. They just seem to be that sense of being unhurried. And they have the right time to make the stroke, the right time to maneuver their vehicle, or whatever it is. And with mindfulness, this is subjectively what it feels like. It's just like time. This is almost time is a little bit slower. You know, there's just that just tiny amount of time in which to respond wisely rather than react with emotion or through habit. So this is a practice of cultivation of right action and right speech, finding ways of protecting the mind from the unwholesome and negative emotions that so easily possess it, finding ways of letting go of negative emotions that have already arisen, systematically cultivating positive emotions, and taking care of and further developing the positive emotions that have already arisen, and learning to look at and to learn from experience, whatever it might be, and whether its tone is pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. This is the whole part of practice. So I have to end the English talk.
So we will have some questions. Okay. Questions by microphone. If anybody would like to ask a question, please raise your hand. That's the time.
Do it like alternate English.
Yes. Alternate to English.
There's a box.
So, a few months ago, I went to a massage therapist, and she knows a little bit about my past, which has been, in recent years, emotional. And she said, I think it would be a good idea to go into a temple and Dong Sang Han. I don't know what this word means. I wonder if you would be able to enlighten me.
Well,
I could Dong Sang Han.
Yeah, I mean, Long Sankan usually means like prepare for death. So I'm not sure whether it should mean that or not. That would be, like we should use it for monks, after you've been having treatment and so on, it's not going to get any better, and it's just sort of make your peace with it and die. So I think maybe you need to clarify that with her, because I'm assuming that's not quite what she meant. Yeah, so that's just how I would use that word. Yeah.
It's kind of referring to your insight perhaps into maybe current mindfulness techniques, which certainly on their inset sort of like relaxation is going to move away into meditative state.
Yeah.
Do you see any real certainly I think for some practitioners it is more about being, for want of a better word, becoming more enlightened.
Yeah.
Whereas for many of these other people, that doesn't really seem to be the goal. It's almost like we have to go into the social scene who's doing this.
Yeah, I have to confess my first-hand knowledge of the whole kind of secular mindfulness movement is pretty second-hand. I don't have that much contact. So I think that the word mindfulness, as it's used these days, has become like an umbrella term, and which there's no really clear, defined understanding of what that word means, and so people, teachers, they sort of put all this different spiritual practices, which in Buddhists would have different terms and different names, and put it all together and just call it all mindfulness. And so there is such a spectrum as well that I kind of hesitate to generalize about it in that way. I mean, there are certain elements in that secular mindfulness thing that cause some unease, particularly in this program to teach mindfulness in the American military a few years ago, with the architects of the plan saying that it would increase efficiency on the battlefield if people could be more mindful, so more aware of being triggered, and not being caught up in sort of fear and anxiety and so on. So this is a question of where does ethics, ethical responsibility relate to that kind of mindfulness. In other in other iterations, then there is more of an ethical dimension. It seems to depend on the teacher and their background and the context and the expectations and what people want. And you say, like sometimes like get the feeling where it's in the applications in business world, it's just like the latest thing to get people to work harder and more efficiently, rather than there's any genuine interest in the spiritual well-being of the people in the company. And maybe that's unfair to some places, but that seems to be the case in quite a few occasions. So I think that people are always going to have different spiritual aspirations. This has been the same since the time of the Buddha. So the traditional way of talking about this is to distinguish like practicing in order to go to heaven, or practicing for nirvana or for enlightenment. And generally speaking, it's been the monastics who've been more focused on the practice for enlightenment, and the lay Buddhists the practice for heaven, rebirth in heaven. Then when you had the first generations from the 60s and 70s of Buddhism and spiritual teachings going into the West, then it's always with us, we want the best. We want a shortcut and just the essence and all the spirit, the cultural trappings, that kind of idea. And we're going for the top, for enlightenment. But in fact, my interpretation is that just like most people in most cultures, they actually want heaven realm. So, but it's just they end up redefining enlightenment to be heaven. So what I mean by that is, like if you're heaven, I'm talking about here as a permanently pleasant or desirable state of existence. So you're meditating or you're divine because you want to get this state, like of being really calm and peaceful and clear and mindful, whatever you're doing, wherever you are, and be able to sustain that all the time. Now that's heaven. That's what. But so that's often, being promoted as kind of enlightenment. But it's a heaven realm. So any idea that you want a sort of a particular state of being that you want to stabilize and extend indefinitely, that's a heaven realm in the Buddhist psychology. So I think that in a lot of these Western style practices, then this is really the goal. It's a new way, a sort of modern psychological way of talking about what traditional Buddhists would call heaven. I don't know whether that quite covered your question.
นมัสการพระอาจารย์ค่ะการฝึกสมาธิจะช่วยให้ลดความวิตกกังวลได้หรือไม่หากผู้ฝึกยังว้าวุ่นวิตกกังวลอย่างมากอยู่ควรจะใช้หลักการใดในการคิดคะ
ก็เทศเรื่องนี้ทีนี้ไม่ให้คือให้รู้เท่าให้รู้ทันพอความวิตกกังวลเกิดขึ้นเราก็รู้ก็ไม่ตามมันอย่าไปสู้กับมันรับรู้รับทราบเราถ้ายังลงก็ไม่ถึงเชื่อของมันก็จะค่อยๆจางไปทีนี้อารมณ์ไม่ว่าจะเป็นความวิตกกังวลหรืออะไรก็แล้วแต่เราเทียบอย่างนี้เหมือนกับว่าเราแมวมากินนมที่บ้านเราแล้วก็วางจานนมให้มันก็มาทุกวันแต่วันไหนที่เราไม่ให้นมมันก็มาเหมือนกันก็ยังมีความหวังอยู่วัน2 วัน3 วัน4 วันสุดท้ายลุงบ้านนี้ไม่ให้แล้วลุงไปหาที่อื่นเหมือนอารมณ์ที่เข้ามาในจิตใจเรานะถ้าเราให้อาหารมันก็มาทุกวันแต่ถ้าเราเฉยๆไม่ให้อาหารมันก็เข้าใจในที่สุดของมัน
เมื่อเราฝึกสมถะกรรมฐานไปสักระยะเราจะเริ่มเข้าวิปัสสนาอย่างไรเจ้าค่ะ
คือการที่มีธรรมเนียมหรือว่ามีสำนวนแยกสมถะกับวิปัสสนานั่นก็เป็นมติของอาจารย์รุ่นหลังสมัยพุทธกาลไม่แยกเราถือว่าจิตใจจะเจริญในธรรมมันจะต้องมีความมั่นคงความหนักแน่นความนุ่มนวลความอ่อนโยนต้องมีคุณสมบัติพร้อมแล้วก็จะต้องมีทางปัญญาที่จะมองจะวิเคราะห์จะดูอย่างละเอียดก็ต้องพร้อมกันอันนี้ถ้าเรามองในแง่ของอารมณ์ความรู้สึกนี่ก็เป็นเรื่องของสมถะถ้ามองในทางด้านปัญญามันก็เป็นเรื่องของวิปัสสนาแต่จะต้องพร้อมกันหลวงพ่อพุทธทาสท่านเปรียบเทียบอย่างนี้เหมือนมีดก็ต้องมีทั้งน้ำหนักและความคมน้ำหนักของมีดต้องเปรียบเทียบเหมือนสมถะและความคมของมีดเรื่องปัญญาเรื่องวิปัสสนาถ้าเราเอาแต่วิปัสสนาเนี่ยเอาดูความเกิดดับดูอะไรต่ออะไรกันไปแต่ถ้าไม่ฝึกให้จิตมีความสุขมีความหนักแน่นความมั่นคงแล้วมันจะแห้งแล้งแล้วมันจะคือเราจะปล่อยวางความยึดมั่นถือมั่นในรูปเวทนาสัญญาสังขารวิญญาณเราต้องรู้สึกปลอดภัยเหมือนคนเราจะปล่อยจะละอะไรได้นี่ก็เราต้องรู้สึกว่าก่อนจะปล่อยได้ก็ต้องมีที่อยู่ของเราไม่กล้าจะไม่รู้จะอยู่ตรงไหนอันนี้สมถะก็คือการฝึกให้จิตมีที่อยู่ที่สบายที่เรียกว่าเป็นวิหารธรรมมันจึงจะปล่อยวางอะไรได้ดังนั้นสรุปแล้วว่าเรื่องสมถะวิปัสสนาไม่น่าจะแยกคือถ้าทำสมาธิภาวนามันก็จะต้องมีส่วนของความสงบและส่วนของปัญญาเพียงแต่ว่าในบางวาระอาจจะเน้นทั้งความสงบมากกว่าบางวาระเน้นทั้งปัญญามากกว่าแต่จะต้องมีทั้งสองอย่างตลอดเวลาทั้งสมถะทั้งวิปัสสนา
Unfortunately, we are running out of time. Ajahn Jayasoro's visit has been very opportune at this time. He's given us a chance to reflect upon the last challenging 3.5 weeks, and to reflect upon the goodwill from the community here. That's the reason why we are here in these very satisfactory premises. It's the goodwill of everybody here and the community, the teachers, friends. And it's also the reason we will be back at our home, Panyaden, in January, because of the goodwill that we've experienced, which has motivated us to keep going. And thank you for Ajahn to contributing to that Dhamma Jai. That's an incredible feeling of motivation that we go forward and continue to get back on our feet. And even better Panyaden than before. So thank you so much for that. I'd like to ask everyone to bow together.